afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session titled A New Paradigm of International Development Cooperation for Changes in Inter-Korean Relations and for Laying the Foundation for Unification. My name is Hyuk-sang Son, professor at the Graduate School of Public Policy and Civic Engagement at Kyunghee University. It's my real pleasure to serve as a moderator for this session. This session brings together three timely and insightful papers that explore the intersection of development cooperation, security, public perception, and strategic diplomacy, each shedding light on the roles the Korea and its partners may play in shaping future cooperation. Very interesting. I wrote down the introduction, and computer is gone, so I'm rechecking again. Don't worry, I'll get back to you. There we go. And may play in shaping future cooperation around the Korean Peninsula and beyond. We have a little bit tight schedule today, so I kindly ask you, each presenter, to limit your presentation to 15 minutes. After all three presentations have concluded, we will proceed with the designated discussions. Each assigned discussant will have about 5 to 7 minutes for their comments. This structure will allow us to reserve time for the Q&A and open discussion with the floor before the session concludes. To help us stay on track, I'll give a gentle signal when there are 2 minutes remaining in each presentation. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. Our first speaker is Dr. Lee Ji-sun from Institute for National Security Strategy, presenting a paper titled War and Development Cooperation, Revisiting the Rules of Law Discourse for Post-Conflict Reconstruction. Dr. Lee revisits the rule of law as a central but contested principle in post-conflict reconstruction, drawing lessons from cases such as Rwanda and East Timor. She offers new conceptual framework, positioning rule of law as a cross-cutting element throughout the peace development process. Let us welcome Dr. Lee Ji-sun. It's yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Ji-sun Lee from INSS. Thank you once again for this wonderful opportunity to join this discussion, since we are talking about paradigm change after Trump comes in and after the Lee Jae-myung administration comes in this month. Today I'm presenting a paper introducing a particular policy discourse, which is the rule of law. So for many of South Korean people, especially in the OD sector, maybe the theme is not as familiar, because they often think of legal assistance, or maybe they think of something that the Ministry of Government Legislation would involve. But in fact, this concept is far larger than we think, and this is very relevant to many different actors, such as military personnel, humanitarian workers, and development agencies, so on. And also, I want to emphasize that this concept functions as a core and high-level ODA policy goal in conflict-affected situation for IOs and the bilateral donors, and even other countries, including Japan and China. But the problem is that South Korea has dramatically increased its ODA budget for the last couple of years. But the problem is they don't know about this concept well. So this policy discourse remains a marginalized OD agenda. So I wanted to bring us to this particular concept. So we can use this discourse fully for our to systematize and justify our efforts in war zones around the world. And this is my first irony and first problem I want to raise. But second thing is that why we pay attention to this concept, because this is strategically very important these days. This concept is another central point for global ed norm diversion. So this means Western donors and Eastern donors are increasingly competing in the sector of reconstruction these days. And then I'm talking about Russia, China, and Arab countries. They're very involved in the process, reconstruction process in global South countries. But compared to other major policy discourses, such as the promotion of democracy or promotion of human rights, but the rule of law, this concept, is equally popular for Western and non-Western donors. So I think we need to pay attention to this, because their interpretation and application of this concept is very diverse. So we need to have a look on that. So in this context, I think South Korea needs to strategically position ourselves to use this rule of law discourse in the future if we increase our ODA for peace and reconstruction in the future. And so let me get into the more detail with the paper I submitted already, and then please refer to my paper. I will just, you can follow me by page. And for your information, this research piece is just like idle pitching. So I will come back maybe in a couple of months or week with a full paper with a better analytical angle. So let's go to the page 1, which is about, I talked about I defined the concept post-conflict reconstruction in the beginning. And this concept actually, it is about, not just about the physical recovery or social rehabilitation, but it includes efforts to prevent violence, and that they try to lay down the foundation for sustainable peace and economic development. And the next page is about, I just slightly touch upon the history and origins of the PCR. So maybe you're very familiar with this historical case, which is Marshall Plan, that was initiated by the America, and that was the very representative case for reconstruction. But on the other hand, there is another countering effort, which is Molotov Plan, initiated by the Soviet Union. I think this competition between two blocs started right after the Second World War. And then during the Cold War period, the principle of do no harm prevailed for a long time. But the thing is, right after the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001, global politics has been gradually changed, and then they just embrace the concepts of failed or fragile states. They interested in this concept because they want to manage, they want to control the risk and threats from these countries. And then ODA was very right tool to do that task. And more recently, we know that the global community, they included the more peace-oriented goals for their development cooperation activities, such as Goal 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institution, SDG. So that after this, goal introduced, the global community is they have been justifying more interventionist approach in the war zones. But thing is, more recently, you can see that in the beginning of the 2020s, you see that there's a great failure of European and America's efforts, reconstruction efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan. So that case give us another opportunity to reassess our so far efforts to reconstruct other countries. The section 2, I captured the differences between Western approaches and Eastern approaches in reconstructing countries. In the name of liberal peace, Western donors are very heavily involved in the reconstruction process. And then the popular policy goal was liberal democracy, free market economy, and rule of law, and human rights, and so on. And then they believe that these universal values are very important to set up peace foundations. Move on to the page 5. But thing is, even though they just try so much in different, settings like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Rwanda, but there has been a great criticism of this liberal peace model because they're too much imposing rules from outside. They don't really respect the local context. So that was the criticism, central criticism of the Western approach. In contrast of this approach, from the Eastern donors like Russia, China, and Arab countries, they suggest different norm to involved in reconstruction process, which is, I would say, this is Eastern model. So I reviewed relevant academic works and evidence, and then I just capture key differences between Western and Eastern model when they are reconstructing countries. So as you can see that in the table, I highlighted that the first key differences is that the Eastern donor pursue authority and stability first. So they justify authoritarian regime first, and then within that system, they impose very strong military enforcement. So through that, they pursue peace, stabilization. And then right after that, they prioritize infrastructure development. And other things is that when they interpret the rule of law, they directly talk about authority and stability, and they justified military intervention. That was the key differences between with liberal peace model, which is a Western model. Let's move on to the page 7. I briefly just touch upon the definition of a rule of law. Maybe it can be confusing for you to understand because it's not familiar one. 법치주의 in Korea, or in Korean, maybe we can say 법치주의 or 법의 지배. This is about two things. So one is that this is about to set up laws to curb states' leeways. That was the first dimension. The other dimension is that it's about establishing order and stability for local people. So, so this is two-way definition of this concept. And the thing is, this is a very common principle in legal world, but for international development cooperation and the community, they think that they just embrace this concept and that they just try to apply this concept for their successful reconstruction intervention. So their interpretation is slightly different for different donors and different agencies. So when they interpret the rule of law, the first mainstream is that they think that this is a very initial stage if they want to stabilize the country, they just talk about the rule of law in that stage. But other group of people, including UN, they try to embrace the larger concept of the rule of law these days, which means that they think the rule of law is not limited to a certain stage or certain type of ODA, but they think that this is a high-level, comprehensive policy goal for reconstruction situation. So this is kind of a new trend within United Nations and other few bilateral donors to interpret this concept more broadly. And then the problem to when we apply this concept as a high-level policy goal, there has been a key criticism when they apply to this concept. The first one is about legal pluralism. This means when they apply certain rules, they need to respect local context. Because the legal pluralism means that in the local context, there is not only state law, but also other local rules and traditions exist, so that there must be conflict between two different law systems. But the problem, the Western approach has been neglecting this concept, legal pluralism so far. So that was the key criticism. Another things we can talk about after for the post-conflict reconstruction is the transitional justice. Transitional justice, it's about properly punishing or rewarding people after war. But the thing is, when we just pursue peace and they want to pursue transitional justice at the same time, these efforts are conflicting because sometimes punishing people provoke resistance. So it could harm the process of making peace and social cohesion. So regarding these two key criticisms when applying rule of law, I selected two cases. So I reviewed these cases. The first one is Rwanda's Gacaca court case. The other was the East Timor's constitution drafting project. So I don't go into that detail for these project, but I would say the Rwanda case was the relatively good case. When they apply it, they try to respect the legal pluralism, and they achieve transitional justice relatively well. But the bad case is the East Timor case, which means even though they collected greater interest from the global community, but actually the process was hugely led by the Western external actors, so that they excluded local context and people. So let's go to the conclusion, and I highlighted some context why we need to pay attention to rule of law concept once again. But before wrap up the discussion, back to the big theme, which is the new paradigm we're talking about here. But I guess there's more of not so positive changes and challenges ahead if we're talking about global ODA. And then when we're talking about Trump, and Trump led changes in ODA sector, because Trump talks about peace through strength. This means that actually foreign aid seems to be less relevant and is dramatically shrinking. But I think there is some exception, which is reconstruction ODA. Trump would be very interested in this concept. because Trump is very keen to the business and security opportunity after the war, the Ukrainian war, in Ukraine as well as in Russia. So I think in that case, reconsider ODA and the rule of law would be put on the table once again. They try to put more effort to revise their existing approach. And then I would say for South Korea, maybe this rule of law concept would be very beneficial because if we properly use the peace ODA, we need firm core policy idea to actually exercise this new budget. So in that case, I think the rule of law is something that we need to carefully pay attention to. But as I said, this concept is very flexible, which means we can interpret it widely. So South Korea needs to define our own concept of rule of law to actually push this initiative in the future. I'm not sure whether President Lee would increase ODA in the future or not. But his key ODA word would be culture, climate change, technology, and global south, and peace. So I would say this is more opportunity. There is more room for us to think about what things we can do. I think in that sense, a rule of law would be very meaningful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for that thought-provoking analysis, and it seems rather challenging presentation to the designated discussant. I cannot wait to hear the commentaries from Professor Kim later. Okay, our next speaker is Professor Izumi Ono from the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, Japan, presenting Trump 2.0 shock and the implication for international development cooperation, a Japanese perspective. Professor Ono examines the global implications of Trump 2.0 shock, especially the dismantling of USAID and the retreat of the USAID leadership. And she argues that this abrupt shift calls for a new coalition of donors and positions Japan as a stabilizing state through its philosophy of self-reliant development, multilateralism, and commitment to the global norms such as SDGs. Now welcome Professor Ono, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Song and everybody. My name is Izumi Ono from Japan National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies. I'm so happy to be here in such a beautiful place in Yosu. And also, I think this KAI's Korean Foundation, the conference, is a really excellent opportunity because I think that the overarching topic is for security concern under the changing kind of international kind of environment. At the same time, I really feel like development, peace through development is a very, very important thing. And also development cooperation can be a soft power. So I really appreciate that the organizer included this topic is an important session. So let me start. Okay. So I will talk about Trump 2.0 shock and its implication for international development cooperation and the Japanese perspective. So let me discuss three issues. First is how this Trump 2.0 shock affected. That is a major consequence on international development cooperation in general. And second, I will discuss how Japanese development cooperation is doing after this Trump shock. And then let me share with you the implication and the way forward. This is not the analytical, this is not the kind of academic piece because that the trend is changing so dramatically, so I kind of my presentation is more kind of trend analysis. I hope that this will still okay for you. And also, if time allows, I will just show you some of the supplementary information of the latest development of Japanese development cooperation policy, including the 2023 charter. Okay. So, Trump 2.0 shock on international development cooperation. I think, as everybody knows, upon assuming his office in January 20th, he changed many things through a series of executive orders announcements, and then it is widely seen as an assault on foreign aid. His announcement and also executive order include closure of USAID, which has been the core aid agency of U.S. in the 1961, and also more than 80% of really reduction of USAID activities now being transferred to State Department, and also reduced multilateral engagement, particularly UN agencies, and withdrawal from Paris Climate Agreement, suspending refugee resettlement program funded by State Department, and also anti-ESG, environment, social governance issue. He doesn't like diversity, equity, inclusion, and then he's not so positive about SDG. Furthermore, I think this direction has been even confirmed by the latest the budget to 2026 proposal. So his kind of budget request confirmed this direction. Although that I think there is a kind of court debate on this issue, but administration is not seems to be kind of carrying these issues. Okay. So what are the consequences? Let me say three, maybe triple shock. First is financial aspect, which is exacerbating already scarce aid resources. Particularly U.S., as you know, was the world's largest ODA provider, accounting for about 1/3 of total DAC aid volume. And then USAID was accounting for almost over half of the total American aid. And then there has been spin-off effects of European donors reducing ODA, including UK, Germany, France, and Netherlands, many others. So this makes up even bleak prospect of filling SDG financial gap. I think later, maybe from, I think the Finance for Development Conference in Sevilla is taking place, and then there's a tremendous impact on the way of nature of discussion there. Second is developmental aspect, which is worsening multiple crises. So negatively affecting certain countries, particularly Ukraine or African countries, which receive a lot of American aid, and also certain sectors like democracy support, humanitarian aid, global health, etc. And also it is weakening UN system, I'm afraid. And also there are lots of expertise supported by USAID, including kind of policy analysts in the government, and also, professional in both partner countries and also America. So there is a kind of worry of unemployment. So also I have to add, because of that reciprocal tariff, which was announced in the April 2nd, could also have a kind of impact on maybe East Asian countries used to have an export-led development thanks to the open market provided by United States and other allies, but the prospect is becoming more challenging. Third is geopolitical aspect, that is increasing complexity of geopolitical context, which include possible expansion of influence of emerging donors such as China, or erosion of credibility of the Western development cooperation. I think we had that rule of law concept, but the US itself is not committing any longer of this universal value. So these are kind of potential risks of erosion of that kind of confidence we have, Western donors have established. So this graph shows the trend of ODA from selected DAC countries, and including South Korea. So as you can see, this blue line is the United States. So US is the largest, far largest ODA provider, except for the period right after the end of Cold War, because of the US had the aid fatigue. At that time, Japan happened to become the largest donor, but I think more or less, US has been largest donor, and particularly under the Biden administration, is a sharp increase of the ODA to Ukraine. And then Germany is, I think, is followed. Okay. Next slide shows that the USAID spending, it is showed by a blue line that is more than half of total US foreign aid. So as you can imagine the impact of this. And then this is mapping of U.S. country, that the country which received that kind of amount of that USAID support. So that the dark one, you can see the Ukraine, and then African countries, and some of the Middle Eastern countries, like Ukraine, DR Congo, Jordan, Ethiopia, Western Gaza, maybe no longer. But those are the kind of countries which are being affected very, very much. And then this is show that the USAID spending by sector and purposes. So as you can see, blue is a humanitarian aid, orange is health and population, and then gray is a governance, that is democracy support. So as you can also confirm that those are the areas which has been supported by USAID, and then that has a lot of implication. Regarding UN, this graph shows U.S. contribution to the UN agencies, and blue is the amount of U.S. contribution. So WFP is the largest recipient, followed by UNHCR, IOM, International Organization for Migrants, UNICEF, UN headquarters, WHO, etc. At the same time, orange shows that the percentage. So you can see the UNHCR, and then IOM, so that the organizations which are dealing with refugees, support, will be affected a lot. And then UNRWA is a Palestinian organization, and then UNAIDS is being affected a lot. So based on this, what are the implications, what are the consequences for Japan, and how maybe JICA is doing, for example? This is my personal observation, but it seems to me that the government of Japan and JICA have been relatively quiet, and they don't speak so much about that, how they see about this Trump shock, partly because I guess that they are kind of worried about not to raise any issue with the current Trump administration, because we are negotiating with reciprocal tariff at this moment. So they are quietly monitoring the situation. And then it seems also there are direct impact of Japanese bilateral ODA activity is yet to be seen, partly because the types of development cooperation between US and Japan has been quite different. So nature is different. So there is no, at this moment, joint kind of project together. So this kind of makes some kind of relative limited direct impact. At the same time, indirect impact could be large, negatively affecting the environment where the Japanese ODA activities operate. For example, sudden suspension of USAID funding of the government staff and some of the kind of activity of the health system would jeopardize where that the JICA is doing some project. So there are lots of implications in the maybe indirect and also medium and long term. Also, some Japanese NGO are receiving the USAID funding, or their counterpart, local NGO, is receiving US funding. So they reported there are some shocks to them. More concerns also that the possible damage to the popular perception of development cooperation, because that this issue, USAID closure, was so kind of frequently or that dramatically reported in Japanese media and newspaper, which never talk about ODA issues so enthusiastically, but it was so many kind of TV program, etc. So people may feel like, wow, that the USAID foreign aid is not so kind of efficient, there are lots of waste, and the USAID counterpart is JICA, so what JICA is doing. So I think there are some concerns about this gives a lot of kind of negative, meaning that unnecessary kind of the image to development cooperation. Okay, this the table shows that the feature of ODA, US, Japan, UK, Germany. Though I think yellow part is a US and Japan, and as you can see, like a regional distribution, like US is mainly Sub-Saharan Africa, and then Europe, which is mostly Ukraine, and then Japan is more concentrated on the South Asia and also East Asia. Major aid use is that the US is, as I said, that the social or governance and also humanitarian support, while Japan is more economic infrastructure. And then US has no ODA loan, while Japan has ODA loan. US utilize NGO as a measure, an implementer of development cooperation, while Japan has to do more through working with NGO. So those are kind of different characteristics. This shows popular perception of ODA in Japan. There is a cabinet office annually conducts opinion poll of the perception of the development cooperation. Red kind of graph is at a strong supporter, so which used to be very high, 40%, but now declined, and then it was the lowest in the early 2000, which Japanese economy was very, very kind of the bad. And now it has recovered a little bit, but now it is again declining, you can see. And then stable supporter has been there, like pink, but at the same time, you can see that the blue line, which is at the kind of somewhat negative, is again increasing. Particularly concerned is that the young generation, when you look at the young kind of by generation, young generation has less interest in overseas development cooperation, which is very worrisome. Okay. So, what are the implications and rethinking the approach to development in general? So I have to say that this USAID withdrawal may be seen as a symbolic sign of the end of ODA centrality. And then for developing countries, it is an important reminder of the importance of self-reliant development and domestic resource mobilization, so warning of the risk of excessive aid dependency. For external partners, it also provides opportunity to rethink about approach to development cooperation. So I mean, it is important to strengthen the country's system, not just the expert is kind of replacing what the partner country do. You have to really keep working on helping them to be self-reliant. And then there is also need for the effort to for the partnering with the diverse actors, including private sector engagement, because I think ODA resources getting even more scarce. So we also need to greater collaboration with emerging countries, including non-DAC partners, because I think everybody have to work together for the base kind of shared consensus and norms. And then vital importance of rebuilding trust between recipient countries and also between the global south and then traditional donors, which I am afraid is eroding. So the way forward for Japan, this is my personal views. Historically speaking, Japan has emphasized the importance of self-help, self-reliant development, so supporting human resource development and capacity development of recipient country and functions. So I think we should be confident more, not be too much silent, and then I think we should be confident more of the development cooperation approach, and then proactively engage in shaping a global development architecture to maintain and even reinforce multilateralism and contribute to SDG progress. So I don't want to advise Japan to follow suit of America and European countries. So even at least try to kind of secure the ODA volume. I think Japan has a very fiscal constraint. So increasing ODA regular budget is a bit challenging, but I hope they will maintain the kind of ODA volume through efficient, effective resource allocation, which include, for example, effective utilization of ODA loan, which come from a different budget from the general budget, and so more flexibility in the volume, and then upgrading its support to the policy institutional capacity development. I think we need to do more on the policy issues, which maybe was supported by USAID. And then expanding support to local grassroots NGO community, which Japan has a very limited kind of engagement, but I think we have to do more. Finally, I would like to say that it is essential to advance ongoing ODA reform for greater private sector engagement. In this sense, I just wanted to mention that the Japanese government, also JICA, has recently revised JICA law to allow the JICA to have more diverse instruments like a guarantee, etc., to collaborate with the private sector kind of the financing. And then there is also need to strengthen social communication. on the importance of global engagement. I think we need to communicate internally in Japan why development cooperation is important, how we are connected, why that matters for Japan and also the world. I think we have to do it. Yeah. And then importance of building new alliance by integrating traditional donors and emerging global South partners based on shared value and commitment. So in this regard, I really believe that Korea and Japan may be better positioned as Asian DAC donors compared to European at this context, because we are viewed as a more neutral partners to the countries and regions seriously affected by USA withdrawal and also European aid cut. And then I think we have kind of shared that the kind of history of catching up. And then we became donors, so embracing self-reliant development philosophy approach, which is also embedded in, I think, respective development cooperation. So I think that Korea and Japan can even work more closely at this particular juncture. And then in the case of Japan, I think we have a ticket, Tokyo International Conference for African Development in August, which is every 3 years we discuss African development issues. And this time we will be inviting African leaders in Yokohama. I think this is a very good opportunity to think about that how to kind of realize this kind of diverse kind of alliance, stakeholder, philosophy of development. So I really hope that the Japanese government will take account of this important moment. So this is the end of my presentation. And then in this slide, I have included some of the supplementary information of Japanese Development Cooperation Charter, which is that I think we have a 2023 is at the latest version, which have continuity from the long time, at the same time new changes, which could include more strategic focuses, co-creation as an important value, and innovating financing, working with private sector, offer-based cooperation, etc. And also we have separately from ODA, we have official security assistance have been kind of incorporated in recent years. So these kind of new aspects have been explained. So if we have an interest, please take a look at it. And also some more detail of the new, I think, revision of JICA law for greater private funding mobilization have been included. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Honor, for your sharp and forward-looking insight, and also thank you for the supplementary explanation on the Japanese ODA Charter. And our final paper is co-authored by Dr. Nam Soo-jung of KAIPAR and Dr. Kim Eun-mi of Yonsei University, entitled Foreign Aid Perception and Attitudes Toward the Refugees in South Korea. This empirical study explores how Koreans' attitude toward ODA relate to their views on refugee acceptance. Using national survey data, the authors find that humanitarian concern measured by positive views toward the foreign aid is a stronger predictor of refugee acceptance than perceived economic or security threat. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nam. It's your turn now.
Good afternoon. My name is Soo-jung Nam. I'm research fellow at Korea Institute of Public Administration, and thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this panel. Today, I think the slide is not mine. Okay. Yeah. Today, I would like to present an ongoing study that explores how public perceptions of foreign aid related to attitude toward refugees in South Korea. Yeah, I will just keep going. Yeah, okay. Yeah, background of the study. Recent reports by the UNHCR indicate that over 100 million people worldwide have been forcefully displaced. And in South Korea, however, the refugee recognition rate remains below 1%. And 2018 arrival of Yemeni asylum seekers on Jeju Island drew significant public and media attention. And it revealed a sharp contrast between growing global expectations for humanitarian responsibility and the cautious domestic response within Korea. While humanitarian norms emphasize that protection of refugees, public skepticism toward both foreign aid and the refugee burden has been growing in South Korea. Despite ongoing public debate, there is a limited empirical research examining the link between support for foreign aid and attitude toward refugee acceptance. So this study aims to address the gap by using perceptions on foreign aid as a proxy for humanitarian concern. In this study, we pursue three main objectives. First, we aim to evaluate the impact of humanitarian concern measured by support for foreign aid and on public attitude toward refugee acceptance. Second, we examine how perceived threats, economic, social, and cultural, are associated with negative attitude or resistance to refugee acceptance. Finally, we analyze whether these relationships are moderated by local conditions, specifically the density of foreign residents. This study draws on three main theoretical perspectives. The first one is threat perception theory, and this theory suggests that people may oppose refugees when they feel threatened, which is economically, socially, or culturally. This theory has been widely used study in Western countries, and it can be also fit in the Korean context, as there is concerns are growing. And the second one is context hypothesis. This hypothesis is arguing that contact with refugees can reduce prejudice. But in Korea, direct contact is rare and media exposures often reinforces negative stereotypes. Although we do not directly apply contact theory, but we include immigrant density to reflect potential exposure. And the third one is humanitarian concern. In the absence of personal contact, moral values like empathy or global solidarity can shape public attitude. So we use support for foreign aid as a proxy to measure humanitarian concern. And this is a hypothesis. Let me skip to read the hypothesis. And the data for this study come from the survey on inequality and fairness, which was conducted by Social Science Institute at Yonsei University, which was supported by National Research Foundation of Korea. And this sample consists of 4,100 Korean adults from age between 20 and 69, and selected using stratified quota sampling to ensure the representativeness. And this survey includes in total 279 items covering the range of topics related to various issues occurring in Korea. And let me now introduce key variables used in our analysis. And the dependent variable is refugee acceptance based on social distance measure. Respondents were asked to what extent they could accept refugees as a neighbor, co-worker, friend, or sponsor. And we recoded the responses into a binary variable. And then we have independent variable such as humanitarian concern, which was measured by the agreement with the statement that Korea should help the poor in developing countries. And this is measured as 5-point Likert scale. And the second, the economic threat perception reflect that belief that welfare benefit for immigrants reduce benefit for Korean. And the third, the independent variables are safety threat capture the fear of increased crime due to more immigrants, and multicultural acceptance is measured by attitude toward cultural diversity and openness to foreign inflows. And this scale is also reverse coded so that the lower score indicate greater perceived cultural threats. And we also include several cultural variables such as gender, age, education, and so on. So for our analysis, we use ordered logistic regression, given that the dependent variable is measured on an ordinal scale. And for our analysis, we conducted a full sample model to identify general trend across the population. And then we conducted a subgroup analysis by splitting the sample based on the median immigrant ratio, which was the 4.4. And this will allow us to compare the regions with the low versus high immigrant density. So about 76% of respondents expressed at least some level of support for refugee acceptance, and the average levels of humanitarian concerns and multicultural acceptance were moderate to high. And at the same time, perceptions of economic and safety threats were also present, but averaging around 3.3 on a 5-point scale. And the multicultural acceptance was relatively high, 4.5 out of 7. And this is the descriptive statistics. And let me skip also correlation and descriptive details of the descriptive statistics. So I will now present the result from Model 1 based on full sample. As expected, humanitarian concern has a significant and positive effect on refugee acceptance. And this supports our hypothesis that pro-humanitarian attitude foster openness toward refugee. And among the threat-related factors, the perceived safety threats, especially concern about crime, emerges as the strongest negative predictor, even more bigger than the economic threats. And also, it means that public safety concerns are the major barrier to refugee acceptance. And multicultural acceptance also was matter. For those who prefer cultural homogeneity are significantly less likely to support refugees. And this aligns with our expectation that low cultural openness is linked to the high perceived threats. And interestingly, we find the result that it was counter to the classical contact hypothesis, while the contact theory suggests that more exposure to immigrants reduce prejudice. But in the Korean context, higher local immigrant density is associated with lower refugee acceptance. And this suggests that the quality or context to contact may heighten threat perceptions rather than reduce them. And lastly, constant with previous findings, women and more educated individuals are generally more supportive of refugee intake. And this is model 2 and 3. In low and high immigrant areas alike, humanitarian concern consistently increases support for refugees, but its effect is even stronger in high immigrant regions, and economic threat also negatively impact refugee attitude. So where immigrants are more visible, safety concerns remain the dominant negative predictor for regardless of the area. And multicultural acceptance supports refugee acceptance across the board, but this effect is strongest in the low immigrant areas. So finally, in conclusion, humanitarian concern significantly increases refugee support, while crime threat is the most powerful deterrent. And local immigrant density moderate these dynamics. And so the policy implication is to improve social cohesion. Policies must combine the accurate information, civic engagement, and also long-term multicultural vision with global citizenship education. Thank you so much.
Dr. Nam, and thank you for the very interesting analysis, and also thank you for the keeping the time. And now it's time for discussion. And first I invite Professor Kim Ji-young from Sungsil University, our designated discussant, who will provide commentary to Dr. Lee Ji-sun's presentation on the rule of law and the post-conflict reconstruction. Please.
Okay, thank you for giving this great opportunity. So I have 5 minutes or 7? Okay, I'll do my best. I think this is a very timely subject today when there are various conflicts taking place. As the title implies, maybe we really need to accelerate our cooperation efforts when the world is moving toward a more fragmented and divided stage. So, war and development cooperation. The paper overall provides a very nice literature review on the concerned topic. In particular, it delivers a well-organized historical pattern of the international approaches toward the post-conflict region. However, I think the paper is still in progress, and hope the following comments and questions could be of use for the author to complete the project. The most critical comment or question on the paper is about the academic significance of the issue of rule of law itself, especially for post-conflict reconstruction process. I thought the paper needs further elaboration on why this issue of restoration of rule of law in post-conflict reconstruction has the utmost importance. For instance, there could be many other urgent issues, such as the development of political stability and human rights, and restoration of the civilian government, etc. I'm not at all the expert on this issue, but based on my common sense. So I was wondering why the author chose to focus on this issue, very specific issue of the restoration of rule of law in post-conflict region. On page 1, the main argument goes as follows. This study argues that the discourse, challenges, and cases related to the rule of law should be recognized not only as a critical theme in the discipline of law and development, but also as an emerging strategic priority for South Korea's development cooperation and inter-Korean policies. Evidently, this is very interesting and important point. Yet, the argument sounds somewhat descriptive for an academic discussion. Again, to further persuade the readers, I thought it is very important to explain theoretical as well as empirical significance of this issue, the restoration of rule of law discourse for post-conflict regions. And that was my the most critical comment or question for the author on the paper. Throughout the paper, I figured that there are various points that need further explanation or elaboration. For those who are not really familiar with this topic. For instance, on page 5, the paper states, the global financial crisis of the late 2000s further accelerated international criticism of the liberal peace model. The author didn't really elaborate on this point, and so I was not sure how these two events had relevance. So the global financial crisis and international liberal peace model, I was not sure how these two are related. So hopefully the author provides further elaborations on these issues. And next point, maybe that would be my last big comment on the paper, is about the table 1, the models, when the author compares the two different models, the Western versus Eastern model on post-conflict regions approaches. Indeed, throughout the paper, the author compares the two models continuously. However, it was not clear how the author distinguishes or refines post-conflict reconstruction model from the general development cooperation model. In many places, the author seemed to be comparing development approaches of the Western versus non-Western countries, rather than specifically comparing their post-conflict reconstruction models. So it was somewhat confusing, and the table 1, many variables and categories were much about the development cooperation models rather than post-conflict models. So I was not sure how the author distinguishes the differences between the two. These are some minor points. There were many statements and arguments without evidence. So maybe because this is the paper in progress, and there are many references are missing, maybe, again, this is not a completed project, so the author might pay attention on these issues too. My suggestions, which is, I'm not sure if this could be helpful, but I've thought that the part on rule of law dynamics in developing countries on page 10, this was very helpful for me to get the picture. And I thought that maybe it would be more strategic to put this part before chapter 3 to increase the reader's understanding on the context of developing countries before the author actually goes into the detailed discussions on more specific content and issues of the restoration of rule of law in post-conflict regions. Also, in conclusion, the author mentioned the divergence between Western versus non-Western understandings of the rule of law in reconstruction settings. I think this is very clever and interesting point and framework that could be used when the author further revises the paper. So that would be the end of my comments. Thank you.
Wow, Professor Kim, we appreciate your critical reflection and very constructive engagement and detailed suggestions even for the revision of the paper in the future. Thank you very much. Now I invite our discussant, Dr. Kang Woo-chul from Exim Bank of Korea, to offer his commentaries to Professor Onor's paper. Please.
Good afternoon. I am Woo-chul Kang from the Korea Export-Import Bank. Firstly, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this session as a discussant. It is also a great pleasure to meet Professor Ono and colleagues in beautiful Yeosu. Professor Ono's presentation was very clear. She provided, through analysis of the historical context of the Trump shock, quantitative review of ODA budgets, and the impact of bilateral and multilateral cooperation in response to the Trump shock. I've prepared 2 comments and 1 question. First, I would like to comment on Trump's role as a facilitator and the donor countries' solidarity in Trump era. Then, I would like to ask 1 question regarding the revision of Japan's JICA's law. First, regarding Trump's role as a facilitator, I believe that Trump promoted the reduction in ODA budgets of major donor countries and the importance of the private sector's role in development finance. In other words, it was not a trigger, but rather an accelerator. Obviously, the integration of US aid into State Department and the reduction in the ODA budget were breaking news. However, the volume of ODA commitment by major donor countries were already declining. This trend is common in the UK, Germany, Italy, Canada, and France, excluding the US. The main causes cited include temporary increase due to the pandemic, physical defeats, and increased defense spending. It is concerning the role of development cooperation, such as addressing poverty in low-income countries, the HDP nexus, and governance to prevent conflicts, is being overshadowed by the role of missiles. Trump cut the budget of ODA from the humanitarian perspective and eliminated grant aid. However, the functions of the DFC, which plays a role in development finance, were strengthened. The DFC was established in 2018 by President Trump to counter China and strengthen the role of the private sector in development cooperation. The DFC's approved amount increased from 4.8 billion in 2020 to 12 billion in 2024. Trump is emphasized national interest by utilizing the DFC, which imposed less financial burden compared to grant aid. He is emphasizing the role of development in pursuing strategic values. Second, the gap left by the US and solidarity of donor countries. This is a concern from the perspective of developing countries. The reduction in the US ODA budget was the cut in the ODA budget for humanitarian aspects such as food security, health, refugees, and gender. As you mentioned, it will be difficult for the single country to fill the gap left by the US. Therefore, other donor countries must unite to fill the gap. However, as I mentioned earlier, major donor countries have already reduced their ODA budgets, so they are unlikely to have financial capacity to compensate for the Trump shock. If possible, cooperation for strategic ODA may be possible. There are serious concerns about the lack of global public goods for the least developing countries and vulnerable groups. I believe that the cooperation between South Korea and Japan as like-minded countries is required in this situation. This year marks the 60th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic relations between South Korea and Japan. I hope that South Korea and Japan will collaborate through the development cooperation to pursue normative and strategic values in the future. Lastly, I have a question regarding Japan's policy changes in the revision of JICA law. Professor Ono briefly mentioned the revision of the JICA law in her presentation, but I would like to ask about this. Who were the key actors or policy entrepreneurs in the revision of the JICA law? Could you please provide an additional explanation on the process of the revision? I think this revision will be led to the positive outcome for everyone. This is because the lead of government budget saving, proactive response to the global trends, expansion of JICA scope or ODA implementation, and possibly corporate participation. However, it is difficult to identify who played a central role. If you have any insight to share, I would greatly appreciate it. I believe this is an important point to consider, as South Korea is also discussing strengthening its DFI functions. Once again, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to Professor Ono for coming all the way here. This concludes my remarks about the presentation. Thank you for the listening.
Thank you, Dr. Kang, for your excellent commentaries and questions too. And now I invite Professor Kim Bo-kyung from Jeonbuk National University, our discussant for Dr. Nam's paper. Professor Kim?
Okay, thank you, Professor Son. It's a great honor to be on the panel, and also thank you, Dr. Nam and Dr. Kim. I feel lucky to be the first reader of this amazing work, and I believe and I understand that it's in its rather earlier stage, so I hope my comments and questions could in any way help in finalizing the piece in future time. So delving in as a reader, I felt that the study makes an original contribution by examining how attitude toward aid as a proxy for humanitarian concern shapes Korean perceptions on refugees. However, while reading the piece, several questions came to mind, of which I would like to share here today. So first is on the integration of the theoretical framework. The paper draws on three pillars: threat theory, contact hypothesis, and humanitarian concern, which does offer good conceptual breadth and scope. I assume that the initial attempt by the authors was to integrate the three into a single framework, but at the moment, the three seems to be standing parallel, rather independent, one next to the other, and the interconnection of the three seems rather unclear. So are they competing explanations, or do they work in sequence? Are you trying to catch the superiority of one over the other? That would, clarifying the explanation on that would help the readers follow your point. So for instance, if there's strong humanitarian concern, maybe it could naturally moderate or complement the threat perception, or a threat may even override moral solidarity for humanitarian concern in certain municipal level context. Say regions that are key areas for refugee influx, or if they have high immigrant area, they certainly would have different contexts compared to other areas where they have less or even hardly any contact at all. So especially in Korea, most of the regions where actual contact with refugees, as the presenter have stated, is relatively rare, and media framing definitely plays a big role in constructing the perception. So these interaction between and among the three frameworks, and examining whether they can actually stand as an independent pillar or should be integrated into one, I think the consideration for that could be crucial for navigating the directions of the research. So to suggest an alternative, the paper might benefit from engaging with Stefan and Stefan's integrated threat theory introduced back in the year 2000, and maybe employing their idea of linking symbolic and realistic threats with ideological orientation or empathy might be a breakthrough. So maybe consider that. And secondly, the usage of the term emotions. As a key factor affecting perceptions on refugees, the authors use multiple subjective terms, including empathy, attitude, emotions, psychological factors, and so on. So in particular, the word emotions can feel unspecific, especially when it's functioning as a key to describe why people support certain policies or oppose to certain policies. So rather than broadly referring to emotional or psychological factors, it might help to specify and unify your usage of the term that you're referring to. Is it morality? Is it humanitarian concern? Is it cosmopolitanism? Is it global citizenship awareness? That would sharpen the logic of the work. The third point is on the connection of the contact hypothesis in the Korean context. According to the regression results of the subgroup analysis, in areas with more immigrants, people tend to show more negative attitudes towards refugees. And this, in a way, contradicts the traditional understanding of contact hypothesis, which in reverse explains that more exposure in contact, in fact, helps reduce prejudice towards these people. So it prompts this question: what kind of contact actually matters within the Korean context? If it's not direct contact, are people reacting to foreign workers as a group, to refugees, or to cultural stereotypes? Is that why there is such a negative correlation? So perhaps what we're seeing is not just contact per se, but whether negative contact is voluntary or involuntarily created, and how much perception is actually mediated or created by media. So the importance of contact without structured integration was mentioned during the presentation, but the distinction could be worth noting in the implication part, if that's possible. Fourth, the use of support for aid as a proxy for humanitarian concern. The idea of using attitudes toward foreign aid as a proxy for humanitarian concern, the entire construct itself was very much interesting. But not much explanation was given as to why this underlying assumption should be taken for granted in the first place. So without properly justifying it, it could oversimplify what humanitarian concern really is supposed to capture in this specific paper. People do support aid out of empathy or out of global solidarity, but at the same time, just like how attitude toward refugees are framed by external factors, beyond individual level influence can play a huge role when it comes to encouraging ODA support as well, especially when it comes to a state-led agenda. So equating support for aid with individual level empathy for humanitarian concern, and then taking it a step further and amplifying it into the overall attitude toward refugees might bring doubts if not explained thoroughly enough. Fifth, going on, these are minor questions regarding methods, of which the first is on the choice of response scales. Most of the variables use a 5-point Likert scale, which naturally gives room for neutral midpoint, the checkbox number 3. And for sensitive topics like refugee acceptance, that midpoint can sometimes attract shy respondents. So I was wondering if you considered using a 4-point scale in such cases to reduce bias, especially if all the mean value, as you've shown, hits somewhere between 3 and 4, showing a relatively central tendency or central bias. The second on the method is on the clarity of reverse coding. The variable on multicultural acceptance is reverse coded and is mentioned as so that the lower scores represent greater cultural threat. There's a brief mentioning on page 7, but because cultural threat is central to hypothesis 4 and the only variable that has been reversed, I would recommend making this clearer throughout the paper, maybe label it more directly into table 1, or at least put an asterisk below the table 1, or remind readers at the very end when you talk about the regression results. That would be helpful for the readers to understand. Lastly, in Korea, refugee often refers more to labor migrants than to asylum seekers, which is more the case in Europe. So I wonder if capping the notion all into this one variable called multicultural acceptance could be including broader views on diversity overall, rather than referring to the refugee-specific cultural threat, particularly in the Korean context, which is supposed to be the main and the only target of the study. So that might be worth considering for future refinement of the study, and that's all I prepared. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Professor Kim, for your very insightful commentaries. And before we open the floor, I think I'll give the presenters to have a chance to respond to the the designated discussant, commentaries, and questions, they raised several points or questions. But please remind you that you don't have to answer or respond to each of every comment they made. You can choose most critical one or two at your own discretion, please, so we can preserve time for the discussion with the floor, with our audience, right? So please, Dr. Lee, you first.
Thank you. So I'm going to be very selective, as you said. Thank you very much for the very helpful comment. I was expecting very toxic comments because it's reflecting on my humble work, but I really thank for the kind comments. First thing, you mentioned the academic significance of this work, why this issue is particularly important than any other issue. I agree with you because I didn't really clarify that aspect in my paper. But in the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that this is some sort of a emerging sector for competition between Western and Eastern donors. So I think that's the very interesting phenomena we can just pay attention to. The other thing is that the rule of law is some sort of a missing puzzle for South Korean ODA so far. So because rule of law these days, China and Japan, they are stressing this concept. But this is from my personal chase that why South Korea is not pay attention this one. So I wanted to raise some sort of awareness what's going on the global arena. So that was my point. The other things you just mentioned, the empirical evidence problem, I agree with that because this paper at this stage, it's missing conceptual framework, and that it doesn't really have evidence because of that aspect. So I will amplify this aspect later on. Another thing you mentioned that the differences between development cooperation model and the reconstruction model, maybe I intentionally actually separate development cooperation model and reconstruction model because when we're talking about the post-conflict reconstruction situations, there's different types of financial instruments comes in. So ODA is the small part of it. So we can talk about the investment, commercial investment. We can talk about military aid. We can talk about other official assistance. So that I think, in that sense, I believe we need to separate between development cooperation and reconstruction model. I would say reconstruction model is more larger concept than development cooperation. So that's why. But as you raised up the issue, so I will just maybe elaborate on that part because the separation later on. That's it. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Honor.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate Dr. Khan's excellent comment, which gives a lot of thinking again. So I think I would like to really share my thought in three aspects. The first, I really agree with his first comments on the Trump appearance is kind of as his role is accelerator, is already kind of increasing visible the phenomena. I totally agree. As he said that, already European donors have started to decrease their ODA, including to African countries, even before Trump assumed the office. I think that the European countries are already kind of getting becoming inward-looking because of the acceptance of many refugees, and then which is really also causing domestic, I think, political kind of debate. So, and then they are using part of ODA to support the first year of refugee cost, which also kind of raise a lot of questions among the development experts. So already those signs up kind of are visible. And also, in the case of Trump, I think that middle class people are very much affected particularly Rust Belt people. So when he said, or Elon Musk talk about, well, USAID is inefficient or a waste of money, we should do much more for America first, I think there are kind of already kind of the people who wants to support this kind of initiative. So I agree that his role is kind of accelerator in this regard. Yeah. So this is why I really believe that it is important Japan for making much more careful and also active social communication with the various citizens and also private sectors, because I mean, I think, as I showed, that this kind of opinion poll, young people are kind of less interested in overseas development, and also I think that the popular perception is really the refugee is also still in Japan is not so kind of the positive. So I really feel like the social communication is very, very important for Japan, learning from the lessons from what happened in the UK, the US and European countries. And second, I really agree that I think it's important that I think this is the time, I mean, South Korea and Japan, 60 years of this, normalization relationship is a very, very important opportunity to really think about putting something together in the field of development cooperation at this critical juncture. So I really appreciate his comments, and also we should really start seriously thinking about what we can do. And then third one is his very interesting questions. Who are the key policy entrepreneurs who actually took initiative and made possible for the JICA law revision? This is my personal view, because I was in charge of the kind of chairing this committee for review this proposed this funding, but I think it's a combination of various factors. First, I think Minister of Foreign Affairs at that time, Kamikawa, she has been very much kind of committed. This was one of her kind of agenda when she assumed the office. So this kind of proposal came from the minister. At the same time, there are at the technocrat level in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in the International Cooperation Bureau, who are really thinking about to make this revision because of the need for much more greater engagement of private sector, but JICA's instrument is very much limited compared to other DFI in European country or US. So I think technocrats took this advantage of ministers' kind of interest in pushing, and then also JICA took this as an opportunity, because of course for JICA it is a very important issues, and then I think Ministry of Foreign Affairs was much more kind of proactive, so they're really willing to accept or respond to this initiative. And also Ministry of Finance is because they are in charge of budget, so generally they are very much kind of cautious about ODA budget kind of issues, but because of the budget constraint, they know that ODA budget is not going to increase. So I think for them, there's no point of disagreeing that engaging more private sector with the assumption that there is a kind of that a good collaboration between JBIC and then JICA. And then in general, in the private sector, there are lots of interest in sustainable finance. So there are lots of business interest in working with them, and then there are many kind of the forum and also study groups. So already I think there are some kind of bases in the private sector who have also wanted to support this initiative. So I think the various factors made possible for the making the proposal to happen. So this is my understanding. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Honor and Dr. Nam. Once again, please be advised. Please, you don't have to respond to each of every comment the discussant has made. Okay, so you can be selective and you can choose one or two. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kim, for your comments. And regarding the question on theory, while we considered applying the integrated rate theory, the this study adopted a simplified framework due to the survey limitation, and we just did an exploratory study, and we treated the three theories as complementary. Threat perception explains negative attitude, while the humanitarian concern explains positive ones, and the context theory can play a kind of mediating role. And also humanitarian concern and threat perception may coexist within a complex structure, particularly in environment shaped by more media exposure than direct interpersonal contact. But for the future research, we can build on this by the employing integrated threat theory. Thank you for your suggestion. And regarding the interpretation of context theory, we observe both humanitarian concern and perceived safety threats. And this pattern means that the presence of ambivalent attitudes rather than pro and con stand. In other words, residents may feel a stronger sense of moral responsibility or empathy toward immigrants, while at the same time experiencing anxiety or fear related to when it comes to the public safety. And also in Korean context, contact with immigrants is often indirect and asymmetric, taking the form of media exposure rather than the mutual interpersonal engagement. And the proxy, the ODA as a proxy variable, that was the very important point. And indeed, support for ODA can be heavily shaped by the external factors such as media or state lead motivation. And in Korea, ODA has often been promoted with a national interest narrative, such kind of thing, and it means that the respondent support for ODA may reflect state-driven reasoning rather than the humanitarian concern. So, but we adopted this as a proxy due to the lack of direct emotional or experiential measures, but we fully acknowledge this as a limitation. Maybe future research should incorporate control of these variables. Thank you for your comments. And also for future study, we hope to distinguish types of immigrants, such as migrant worker, marriage migrant refugee, and types of contact, which is direct or indirect, to better understand how contact operates under different conditions in Korea. Thank you again for your comments.
Thank you, Dr. Nam. And now I think really thank you for your patience. A room-packed audience in here, grand volume. And we now open the floor for the discussion. And if you have a question, please raise your hand and the staff will bring the microphone and you identify yourself and your affiliation. And please be advised to keep your time and your comments or your questions concise, so we can have enough time for multiple round of this session. Okay, do you have any of you question or the comments? Okay, there we go in the back. Thank you.
Yes. I have a question to Dr. Nam. First of all, I'm really glad to hear Dr. Nam's presentation because it's the only one, the presentation for my special field, immigration and refugee in this conference. I was so glad to. But my question is that, can you to test the contact hypothesis, you use the immigrant density. But usually, the migration studies distinguish the refugee from the immigrant in general, because we consider some refugees different category of some immigrant groups. So, but I fully understand that, because in Korea, as of some 1994, so we have only the more than 1,400 refugees in Korea. But it's really difficult to test the contact hypothesis with some real refugees in Korea. But at least you should discuss. You need to discuss that why you had to use the local immigrant density as a proxy variable for to test some contact the hypothesis, I think, because so it's a really critical issue, and still I have some still doubt that the questionnaire in the survey, like should we help the poor in developing country, is the humanitarian concern is not the same as the support for ODA. Because the support for ODA is a matter of the money, right?
Yeah.
so I still doubt that questions.
Okay, Dr. Nam, you will respond to him later, and I will collect one or two questions or comments from the floor. Then,
Thank you, all panel members here. My name is Hakin Lee from Tokyo International University, and I have a question regarding the value-based diplomacy with the ODA to Professor Yi and also Professor Ono. Professor Yi talks about the Eastern model when comparing contrast with the Western model, which they're not the same. One emphasizes on sovereignty, the other emphasizes on liberal value. And my question, I guess, also to Professor Ono would be something like, when we discuss about the aid diplomacy, it can be perhaps associated with the literature in the economic statecraft. We have the positive and negative economic statecraft. So I guess the aid assistance would be the positive economic statecraft. But at the same time here, I just do a quick search regarding the ODA. It seems like Japanese government or maybe other countries, they do not really put rules of law or, let's say, human rights as criteria. So I'm asking actually, are those governments, they put some criteria, for example, human rights, democracy, before they offer aid to those countries? In contrast also, do a research regarding China, because I focus on China's foreign policy. I find that the Chinese government, they haven't put any conditional terms regarding aid and assistance. But I guess that I have one more implication, and then I will stop.
Okay.
The implication here is China right now is becoming richer. They offer aid, they offer assistance to those countries without any conditional terms. And this is why the United States actually accused that China has upset the rule-based order because they prolong the authoritarian countries. But right now, if you have South Korea, Japan, or even European countries, if they offer aid, but in the context of the value-based diplomacy, perhaps it's going to be a kind of parallel order regarding aid, regarding assistance, which is something similar to the BRI with the current economic reward.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you. Could you wrap up your comments?
Yes, this is actually my implication.
Okay.
I want to talk about the competition.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you. We are running out of time, and we have 2 questions. I collect one more if you don't have. Okay. Now, let's take turns from Dr. Nam. You respond first, and Dr. Lee and Professor Honor, you're going to take next turn. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Lee, for your comments. And actually, we use the proportion of the immigrants in each local government as a proxy for a potential contact exposure. While this does not capture the quality of contact, as you mentioned, and we thought that this this can allow us to examine how regional density relate to the perceived threat. But however, as you mentioned, we will try to explain cautiously with the limitation of using this as a proxy indicator. And regarding the second question, the question about the measurement of humanitarian concern as a perception on ODA. Actually, the question the question was that, do you think Korea should help the poor in developing countries? So it's not all about money. So we thought that this includes some sense of humanitarian. Thank you for your question.
It's honor. Okay.
Thank you very much for your questions. Okay, so I think maybe your question is at aid diplomacy and also values. Yeah, I think there are maybe two angles which I wanted to mention. First, on the economic-related aspects, I think similar to Korea, I think Japan has held the aid philosophy as an aid for graduation. So it's not the aid is permanent kind of the things, and then it will be graduate, and then we will become hopefully at the kind of equal partner for trade and investment. So in that way, I think Japan has provided ODA in combination with the infrastructure development, human resource development, to improve the business environment of the partner countries. So that itself, I think, is a trinity of ODA, trade, investment, has been, I think, long put in place in Japanese ODA from almost from the 60s and 70s. So that is, I think, one of the maybe the economic aspect. Now more, I think, so I think this can be, I think, combined with the philosophy of the development, like a self-reliance and aid for graduation. The other issue, the rule of the law. I think Japanese latest Development Cooperation Charter 2023 talks more kind of actively of the importance of international environment because that the security situation is changing. And then ODA is a peaceful mean, but to contribute to like a maritime securities and also maybe improving governance and then sharing that the kind of principle of maybe the universal value, including democratic system and human rights. So in a way, this, I think, rule of law concept is more strongly also embedded in the Japanese Development Cooperation Charter, which could also support maybe private sector to do the business. Another thing is that the support for to build the country system or democratic system, which I think Japanese approach is slightly different from the US in supporting democracy from in a kind of very explicit way, but we support, for example, building legal system, like the commercial law and those things in several countries in East Asia and Central Asia, but we don't impose the kind of standard law. I think we work with the local, the legal expert to find out how those local contexts can be kind of further modernized. So I think domestically, I think we also kind of support this kind of building the legal system. At the same time, more recently, the rule of law in terms of the international context that is more strongly advocated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And concise, please.
Thank you for the comment. I think that's more, it's close to comment, not the question for me, I think. But as you mentioned, that China's involvement in this reconstruction process is quite different from other countries. And when we're talking about Eastern model, I think across different Eastern donors, there are differences and variations among these groups as well. I think by emphasizing rule of law, China tried to push their commercial interest to support their Belt Road Initiative. But on the other hand, Russia has different consideration. They're more interested in like establishing their military bases in these conflict-affected countries. So I think in that sense, we need to look into that kind of differences within the group, maybe in the future. And in that context, the rule of law is differently interpreted by these Eastern donors. So I think that's another form of aid diplomacy that the Eastern donors try to promote in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for the excellent questions from the audience, and our sincere thanks to our presenters for their engaging and insightful responses. And once again, we appreciate thought-provoking commentaries from the discussant. I hope this session has contributed in a meaningful way to the ongoing academic and policy conversation on how developmental cooperation can be reimagined, not merely as an aid delivery, but as a strategic instrument for building peace and stable regional and global order, and more a just, compassionate world. And thank you once again for your active engagement. I wish you a productive and inspiring remainder of the conference. Thank you very much.